think it's wonderful that David is accompanying himself. What a talent, and what a beautiful tune. The piece, for those of you who don't know, is called Ave Stella Maris. Stella Maris means the star of the sea in Latin, and Ave Stella Maris means a prayer, perhaps to the star of the sea, if you're being literal, but in very old Christian worlds, for a reason no one quite knows, Mary, the mother of Jesus, was referred to as Stella Maris. So very likely this piece is part of that tradition. But Stella Maris means the star of the sea for ocean-going navigators too. And it goes by other names. Some call it Polaris, the pole star. But as we understand Polaris or Stella Maris today, it's not one star. It's a constellation of 3 stars. The constellation is the brightest part of the larger constellation Ursa Minor, the Little Bear. And Polaris is called the pole star because of its current close proximity to the northern celestial pole of planet Earth. And this probably makes a lot of sense to most of us listening today, well, except maybe for finding out that the star we always thought of as just a star is actually 3 stars. You're welcome for that. But the story we are hearing from many of us is nothing particularly new. In fact, you can raise your hand if you had enough Latin to figure out that Stella Maris means star of the sea, or that Ursa Minor means little bear. That's what I thought. So let's start over. Let's do this again, shall we? Let's take it from the top. David, you accompanying yourself here with us is powerful. The piece you played for us, Pule Hoku Ma'a Pa'a, was stunning. Hoku Pa'a received its name because it is part of the constellation Hoku Pa'a. And Hoku Pa'a is part of the ring of 5 stars forming the Nahoku Ai Aina, which means the enclosure stars. Hoku Pa'a is the star that the earliest human travelers to these lands likely followed after they crossed the equator to the northern hemisphere, where Hoku Pa'a is at first visible. And it is the star early travelers put due astern to guide them home to Tahiti, racing across the equator back to the southern hemisphere. In Hawaiian, Hoku Pa'a means North Star, but its literal translation is immovable star. Yes, David, your version of Pule Hoku Pa'a was very beautiful. And for those of you wondering, Pule can be translated by some as prayer. This is something some of us might be less accustomed to hearing, not just the Hawaiian language, but the central role those stars in the history of the place where we are this morning. And without knowing it, even the speech we are using here in worship, the way we start to talk about the song we all just received the gift of hearing, is transformational. We are in a month where we are looking at transformation, and we are now in the 3rd week of this 3-part sermon series about the 3 fundamentals of the Unitarian Universalist life of faith. In the first week, we discussed the importance of learning what we get wrong, or what it is we still have left to learn, perhaps, about our world and about our faith. Last week, we discussed the importance of learning when we are right, or righteousness, and the important work of practicing righteousness in the kinds of ways we seek justice in the world. And so this week, we come to this 3rd element of our shared life of faith together, worship. Now I know some of us are already getting a little uncomfortable with that word. Worship is another one of those churchy words we discussed, like righteousness. I was actually in a discussion room for General Assembly, and there was a rather assertive side conversation about the word worship. One person objected to the word by asking, "What is it that you are worshiping? We don't all agree on what it is we're worshiping, so why should we call it worship?" Now, the people in the chat were extremely nice, and I think it was actually Reverend Erica Hewitt, one of the foremost writers and practitioners about Unitarian Universalist worship in our movement, who gently came in to say that the term worship, like many other terms we use, means different things to different people. And the objector simply said that at her church they call it a service, and that suited the speaker better. And everyone seemed satisfied with that, or maybe we just got a little into the agenda for that meeting. But I'm sure some of us are thinking the same thing. Worship is a concept, it's a thing that evokes something distinct for people. Even when I use the word worship, I have a part of my own past that imagines bending at the waist or bowing or even taking to my knees at times in worshipful awe or reverence. And as a group of people collected from a wide range of other traditions or beliefs, or no tradition or belief at all, it's hard to get worship into a form that is powerful and meaningful for all people. I knew a guy at my home church in New York who would come for the coffee hour after the first service, read a book during worship, and then hang around for coffee hour after the second service because he just didn't enjoy worship. Some people have a very different way of thinking about worship too. When I go to visit my friend or my family in Washington, I sometimes go to a church with my friend who lives nearby. He attends sort of a large, well, I would say it's a medium-sized megachurch, an evangelical style place. And friends, I tell you, this is their worship service. 25 minutes of singing loud, happy songs, 45 minutes of a talk or a sermon, and then a few announcements, and that is it. Now, you can see I'm getting excited. I'm not saying we're going to start doing that here next Sunday, because as much as I'd love to hold you all captive for a full class period, with all I have to tell you about my given topic for the day, so far it hasn't been the way we do things here. And that is because of something so central to worship of all kinds. It's clear from the chat room conversation, it's clear from my friend's church in suburban Tacoma, it is clear that worship is deeply cultural. Deeply. When Kathleen Rollins and Wayne Arneson, the co-authors of the book Worship That Works, came here to the church a few years ago, they met with the worship team and with me for an evening to look at the ways we do worship here. And one of the things we started with was our order of worship. And the order, my friends, opening song, lesson for all, offertory, reading, pastoral moments, musical meditation, sermon, closing elements, just to sum it up, follows a decidedly Western Judeo-Christian order. I confess this, I know this. In fact, what Kathleen and Wayne said is that it's a deeply Protestant order of worship, which is true. Now, if brands and types of faiths aren't really your jam, and just hang in with me here, because another way to look at our order as we have it right now is that some of us have shared that they find it a little too ordered, or some might say a little rigid. They wish there was more spontaneity in the worship service, and I hear that. I really, really do. Luckily, those who have shared this sentiment, many of them have the good humor and kindness to keep coming anyway, which I like and admire. And plenty of us find peace, find comfort in that order, in the repetition. We sometimes move around the elements. I know we take the freedom of the pulpit here pretty seriously, and we always seek to have a variety of voices and of views. And these differing expressions in worship are important because whether you think of it as one or not, worship is cultural because it's an expression of collective thoughts, talents, and points of view that we hold here. Worship leaders and those in attendance work together to co-create something transformative. Your professionals and volunteers select parts of our service, and we weave and knit those together as best we can to make something for those in attendance that will help them to see where they might have been wrong, what they are learning, or where they might have been right, where justice is needed in the world, or to see what really matters in life. Learning meets justice, meets worship, meets learning, meets justice, meets worship, like three stars circling each other in a constellation. And that is how we find transformation. And let's just say it. It has been a weird few months for worship. We just saw some of the spirits in their workplace recording parts. Stuart and I working together to combine pieces of music and videos. You there on your screens, right where I can see you all. Me here in the church in our little makeshift studio. Just so you know, there are microphones, there's a spotlight on me, there are technical folks working behind the scenes, one here, one at home. We are doing a television show every Sunday now, friends. Seriously. So maybe worship might feel transformed for us because we're not used to that, but it's only changed into something that has already existed for decades. That millions and millions of people watch for their own worship every single week, or more than once a week. The most financially successful ministers in the world are ministers who do this, who transmit the message they have to give into the homes of people all over the world. People who do this have jets, my friends. Plural, jets. So we can feel like our worship is transformed in this pandemic, but it hasn't transformed into something all that unfamiliar to many, many of our siblings in other faiths. And I think that's good. I think it has been too long that the kinds of messages sent over the internet and airwaves from a lot of those ministers could use a little response. I kind of like the idea that our liberal and loving churches like ours are getting into the game a little of transmitting worship, of transforming worship. I hope that this is only the beginning, and that for years to come, all the world will have more of a choice to experience worship in the beautiful and varied ways now available. So many churches, so many communities coming into the public eye. It's beautiful, but it's also a little scary. Because sometimes when in worship, when as a church we make a stance known or a conviction clear to the public, there are problems. There's an idea in some faiths and among some people who believe in the idea that all faiths are really just talking about the same thing in different ways. Some call it God, some call it compassion, and some call it love. Maybe call it akua, but I don't buy it. No matter how nice someone's jet might be, I'm not believing them. I don't buy it because it was not our neighbors who had a sign proclaiming the fact that Black Lives Matter cut from their property under the cover of night. I don't believe that we are all just talking about the same thing in different ways, because if we are focused on the same thing, the same point in the heavens, why are we in so many different places? I prefer not to involve the police, actually, in the matter of the taking or the cutting of our banner. We have no way of knowing the person or persons who did this, and whether they are a member of a community that might be a recipient of disparate and unfair treatment by systems of policing and imprisonment on this island. I did, however, reach out to the construction folks who have cameras patrolling this part of Neolopa Place, because I was a little curious to see what the cameras saw that evening. But when I opened my email earlier this week, I read that the camera facing Neolopa Place that they had installed a few years ago has now been covered by the vines that grow so quickly and so lushly in this beautiful place. It's like the island wanted to keep its secret. Because friends, it doesn't matter actually who took the sign down. It doesn't matter who took a knife to our place of worship in the darkness of night. Because say it was a person who has been advocating their entire lives, say for recognition of the way Native Hawaiians have been treated on this island by the forces that control their bodies and their property. Is that the person we want to call to account for this? I would not want to take part in any way in that person being subject to criminal penalties, though something tells me that was not who took the sign. Yeah, they got our sign, but they only got the first one. One of the things they teach us in ministry is why buy one when you have two at twice the price? So, this is the second sign proclaiming what we know matters. And I will be working with the board, with building and grounds, as well as speaking with the church's valued residents, whose safety and security must be our primary consideration about how to express and display this sign again, because it matters. And this occasion also makes me wonder whether there is a way of making known to those who enter here, who come to our service here online perhaps, or who drive by our church, that we want as a community to learn and to know when we may be wrong, to work and to seek change for what we know is right in our hearts when we are right, and to seek to transform our thinking, our actions, and our expressions to the world, to our worship, in ways that are in keeping with the best principles of the ancestors of this land, where our building stands, as many of us seek to decolonize our thinking, our actions, and the ways we express our culture in the world and in these lands. And to the people who say that church is the place, that worship is the time, when it doesn't matter who you are, what you look like, whom you love, that it is a time for everyone to just come together as one, to kind of mush together in a monoculture, to speak perhaps in different ways about the same one thing. I say to you perhaps that this hour is not when it doesn't matter. This is the hour that it matters most. The voyage we are on together requires that we be guided toward truth, no matter what that truth is. The voyage we are on together requires that we be set on a course toward justice, no matter what that justice turns out to be. And the voyage we are on together requires that we do this together, joined in harmony, crewing that vessel, wrapping around the earth, bounding over hemispheres and into the wide openness of the earth. As a people, as a human race, we are not at the place where it doesn't matter what you look like, whom you love, or even for whom you plan to vote. As a people, as a human race, we are not at that place where it doesn't matter whether you steal onto lands that are not your own, to take something that isn't yours and then refuse to give it back. As a people, as a human race, we are not at that place in history where it doesn't matter what you believe, because we are all talking about the same thing. We are not at that time when it doesn't matter. Not yet. And so it is on this vessel, slicing through weeks we share, one Sunday, one chalice circle, one pauhana, one coffee hour, one kind word at a time, with a prayer offered upon the star of the sea for some, glimpsing hokupa'a for yet others, that little light of mine in the sky there for yet more. We seek truth. An immovable point rising in the distance of our journey, gleaming only when the darkness gathers, when our eyes can see, that a little light marks the infinite direction, the eternal expansion, the divine promise of a time, of a place, of a way far off in our journey together yet, when who you are, whom you love, and what you believe, what you look like, when it won't matter. When some may see one light and others see three, when it doesn't matter. When one star leads you to the knowledge of when you are wrong, when another star leads you to the knowledge of when you are right, and when the final star leads you to the knowledge far from now, when at long lost, learning meets justice, meets worship, meets learning, meets justice, meets worship, so that the light of mine can touch the light in you, and we can recognize the light we share with the stars, pulling us onward, transforming the world about us, until that time when each of our journeys end, until that time when each of us depart our faithful vessel, and at that time truly, that is when it doesn't matter anymore. May it ever be so. Blessed be, and amen.